Hi all. This one is something that Perseus Gold asked me about, so I took a look. It wasn't too great of a look because I was kind of busy, but I want to give it another look. Graham Hancock's presentation on Atlantis Origins, flood myths, and ancient monuments. He's probably, if not definitely, an occultist. Much like Perseus, in that vein. Not sure if he's Illuminati or not. How would I know? But any information that we can glean, of course, we're gonna have to be pretty skeptical. But empty your cup. At least I'll empty my cup. Take notes, and let's see what we can talk about afterwards. Whether it's something you agree with, something you don't, something where, I don't know. I wouldn't know either way type of mentality. That's usually where I end up with, unless it's something definitely, I don't know, juxtaposition always comes to mind, especially with our latest of geoengineering chemtrails, right? Because I mean, this is where it's mostly pseudoscience stuff, at least that's what they say, but it's information we gotta glean and figure it out for ourselves. So without further ado, let's watch. Let's empty our cup, figure out what the information that they're trying to present to us, at least Graham Hancock, and figure out, is this something worth searching, researching more about? And we shall see. And Perseus, if you're here, I'd like to get your feedback. All right, here we go.
Is completely out of touch with history. Here is Sumer in Mesopotamia. This is the famous ziggurat of Ur, which is known as Ur of the Chaldees in the Bible. And this structure has been renovated many times, including most recently by Saddam Hussein. But this structure is about 4,100 years old. In other words, it's not the oldest thing in Sumer. Eridu and other Sumerian cities, Uruk, Lagash, are a bit older than that. It has a background, which archaeologists have traced, but this big structure, about just over 4,000 or so years old. You can see that it's a mud brick structure. It's very nicely done. They have beautiful tile floors, very extensive brickwork. Obviously, this was an evolved civilization at that point. And interestingly, Sumer has a myth of the flood. In fact, it's a fundamental myth to understanding ancient Sumer. It's in an epic called the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tablets of which have survived. And it's interesting when you look at the Ice Age, what happened in the Arabian Gulf, the Persian Gulf, which is that that's how it looks today. But during the Ice Age, there was a gigantic river system ran through the Persian Gulf, the combined streams of the Tigris and the Euphrates, and it was a green and pleasant valley, very suddenly flooded sometime after about 12,000 years ago. So the Epic of Gilgamesh tells the story of effectively the Sumerian Noah, who is warned by a god of the coming cataclysm and advised to put men and women and all the seeds that will be necessary to grow plants in the future into an ark and species of different animals. It's the progenitor of the Noah story in the Bible, character called Oannes, who interestingly wears a fish on his head. These figures are found all over Babylonian and Sumerian iconography. The fish-garbed figure. Oannes was said to be a civilizer who emerged from the waters of the flood after the flood and taught mankind all the skills necessary to restart civilization. Not to start it for the first time, but to start it again. And he is depicted as a creature. It's part fish, part man, but I think the symbolism is very clear. He was able to survive the flood. If we go to magnificent Egypt and the amazing pyramids so there's magnificent Giza plateau, and there's the temple of Horus and Edfu, which is a much later temple. Many Egyptologists will tell you that there is no Atlantis story in Egypt. There is no flood story in Egypt. They repeat this like a mantra. And they use it in part to discredit Plato, because Plato said he got the story of Atlantis from his ancestor Solon, who in turn got it from the Egyptians. And the archaeologists say, but how can that be when there is no Egyptian flood story? But that's absolute balderdash, because there is a huge Egyptian flood story, and it's written in plain view on the walls of this temple. They're called the Edfu building texts, and the background of the Edfu building text is really interesting, because they tell us that there was an ancient document, a document that was so old that it was falling apart, a document that was said to have come down from the time of the gods. But in order to preserve it, in Ptolemaic times, they constructed this temple and they carved the texts into its walls. They're called the Edfu building texts, and they tell of the homeland of the primeval ones on an island, and which was destroyed in a great flood. And there were survivors, and some of them came to Egypt, and they established religion in Egypt, and they established the sites where all future temples and pyramids would be built. So what these texts are telling us is not only that there was a flood, not only that Egypt was founded by flood survivors, but also every temple and pyramid that you see, even though it may date from a later period, has been placed on a site that belongs to a much earlier time, and that was selected in a much earlier time. So there's Plato, and this resonant phrase that the destruction of Atlantis in a single terrible day and night, and that the destruction was so severe that mankind had to begin again like children, with no memory of what went before. And Plato tells us that he got that information from Solon. Solon dates from 600 BC, and Solon got it from the priests of Sais in the Delta in Egypt. So that means that when those priests told Solon that the flood happened, that destroyed Atlantis happened 9,000 years before that time, they're telling us it happened in 9,600 BC. That's 11,600 years ago. And as it happens, again, Plato has been accused of all sorts of things, but it's really weird, because 9,600 BC is actually an incredibly important date. It is a date that marks exactly what is called the end of the Younger Dryas, 11,600 years ago, 9,600 BC. So, I spoke of the Ice Age and how it reached the last glacial maximum 21,300 years ago. Following that, there was a substantial warming, 16,000, 15,000, 14,000 years ago. The Earth was warming up. It seemed to be coming out of the Ice Age. Sea levels were rising, and the whole planet was becoming a more comfortable place to be. And then suddenly, 12,890 years ago, and we can be very precise because of the Greenland ice cores, 12,890 years ago, give or take 5 years, a dramatic, instantaneous deep freeze set in, and the world plunged back into extreme ice age conditions. And there was a radical reglaciation. And that was the beginning of the Younger Dryas, a very mysterious period. It's called the Younger Dryas because Dryas is a particular kind of flower species that survives or doesn't survive in certain climates. And it lasted from 12,980 years ago until 11,600 years ago. And then the Earth started to warm up again. Everything that we know about the story of human civilization, it's really interesting. It all unfolds in that period, after the end of the Younger Dryas, after 11,600 years ago. And for me, the Younger Dryas is like a huge punctuation mark, which caused radical changes on the Earth, and that we have to consider the possibility of what happened before the Younger Dryas. But the Younger Dryas may have been the event that made us a species with amnesia. And wiped out our memory of our past. Now, of course, the Atlantic is very much in the Atlantic Ocean, and that's Athanasius Kircher's map of Atlantis. In those days, south was put on the upper part of the map, but we would like to turn this map around to see it in the way we normally do with Spain and North Africa here, and the Americas here, and there's Atlantis in the middle. focuses on the Atlantic, but actually this is a global story. I would like to consider that story and elements of that story in India, where we are right now. And where, up here in this area, existed the Indus Valley civilization, a civilization that coexisted with Egypt and Sumer, and was of at least equal scale, and was a very advanced civilization. And this place is one of the ports of that civilization. It's called Lothal, and it's not beautiful to look upon, but this is what remains of a huge dock that was built at Lothal. This was a seafaring civilization more than 5,000 years ago. And here is Mohenjo-Daro, now in modern Pakistan. A very difficult place to get to. Santa and I had to have an armed escort to get to Mohenjo-Daro. And this is the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro. And here you can see the bitumen between the bricks where they waterproofed it. It was a very advanced construction. It's not very pleasing on the eye. It looks like a kind of modern housing estate. It's acres and acres and acres of brick. But it is a very sophisticated civilization with flushing toilets, with drains. They really knew how to live. They were every bit as advanced as the Egyptians or the Sumerians. And another site, other Indus Valley sites, Dholavira is in India itself, and Harappa is in Pakistan along the Indus Valley. So here we have this civilization that was flourishing 5,000 years ago in India and was extremely extensive. That traded with Sumer. We know that the ships went back and forth between the Indus Valley civilization and Sumer, and that had a script. And here are some of the so-called Indus Valley seals, which were used. They were stamped into clay to reflect ownership. One thing right off that has to be considered is that the Indus Valley script may be totally a commercial language. It may be simply about labeling commercial goods. It's never been deciphered. But what's interesting on some of these seals is that we see figures in known yogic positions. This position is not such a difficult one to do, with the feet turned forwards under the body, but this position, where, as you can see, the guy's heels are actually forward and the toes are back underneath his buttocks. Now, just imagine doing that. You know, that is a really difficult yogic position. It's called Mula Bandhasana, and you really have to have worked at yoga for a long time to get into that position. Well, what this is telling us is that 5,000 years ago in the Indus Valley civilization, yoga was already incredibly ancient. It was already a fully evolved system, which, with its most advanced postures, already worked out. And we may only guess how much older than 5,000 years ago it was. Obviously, you don't create something like yoga overnight. It's something that takes a long time to develop. And here we see it flourishing in full form in the Indus Valley civilization. And here are examples of the Indus Valley script, which remains undeciphered until this day. And there's a kind of craziness in scholarship, which is related to race, in my view, to racism and to colonialism. The view has, most of us have heard of what is called the Aryan invasion of India. Okay? And what the Aryan invasion of India actually is a fantasy of the colonial era. There never was an Aryan invasion of India. It never, ever happened. But it suited the colonial mindset to imagine that this amazing culture of India had been brought to India by people from Europe. So that's why the Aryan invasion theory was invented. And what scholarship in the last 30 years or so, and particularly in the last couple of decades, has shown is that it's complete nonsense. And that Indian civilization and Indian culture was sui generis in this continent. That's where it emerged. It was not brought in by blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans who Hitler so loved. It was a creation of the Indian subcontinent. And that then raises questions over the most ancient texts of India, which are the Vedic texts, which are the origin of the Hindu religion, which are supposed to have been the work of these Aryan invaders. That they brought the Vedas in with them to India. But now that we know that there were no Aryan invaders, we have to consider the origin of the Vedas. And we have to consider also the date that's put on the Vedas, because the Aryan invasion is supposed to have happened in 1500 BC. Well, nothing much was happening in India in 1500 BC, but 5,000 years ago, 3000 BC, we had this gigantic civilization that we call the Indus Valley civilization. And more scholars are coming to realize that the Vedas really belong to the Indus Valley civilization, and that they were the scriptures of that civilization. So they're not from 1500 BC, they're from 3000 BC or earlier. And they were probably, for a very long period, entirely oral texts. In fact, it's been observed in the 19th and early 20th century, scholars going around talking to Vedic experts in different parts of India would find they were able to recite identical texts from memory without any failure whatsoever, from the deep south of India to the far north. And probably what happened in 1500 BC was that was the first time these texts were written down. Previously they had been oral texts. So we have to consider the mysterious information that is conveyed in the Vedas now, which can no longer be dismissed as simple myth or imagining. The constant references to oceanic travel in the Vedas, not the work of nomadic people, but the work of seafarers. Detailed knowledge of the sea and descriptions of the ice caps in the Himalayas melting and of huge floods pouring down over the land. It may be that the Vedas were already fantastically old 5,000 years ago. They may go back far earlier than that. They may go back right into the last ice age. And of course we have the Indian flood myth, which is the story of Manu, who is rescued from the flood by the fish avatar of the god Vishnu. And Manu and the 7 rishis, the 7 sages, take a huge boat and sail across the waters of the flood, and they are rescued by Vishnu in his avatar as a fish. And they eventually land in the Himalayas, and they re-promulgate civilization from that area. We have to consider what is going on in this story. Are we dealing with the survivors of the lost civilization who settled in the Himalayas and who re-promulgated civilization from there? And perhaps another thing I would ask you to consider is our society is very much focused on technology and on material things. And our scholars tend to look for material explanations for the evolution of civilization. But maybe an earlier civilization was quite different. Maybe it was focused on spiritual values. Maybe it believed in disconnecting from material things. Maybe precisely those yogic ideals, the ideals of the sadhus of India, were central to the civilization that we're looking for. Now, India during the Ice Age, very much more extensive than it is today. And the first place I started looking was up here in Gujarat, where Santha and I first went in 1992 to the city of Dwarka in Gujarat, because there is a specific local flood myth in Dwarka. And that flood myth concerns the god Krishna, and it concerns the beginning of what we call the Kali Yuga, which is the age of strife and darkness that we still live in today. That Kali Yuga was brought on by a flood, and actually if you work with the Indian texts, you can date that to around 3100 BC, which is very close to the date of the beginning of the Mayan calendar. There is Dwarka today, and there is the story of Krishna. It was the city of Krishna. It was a wonderful city, but eventually the flood came and destroyed it. And it so happens, this is where we started our diving in India, is that underwater off Dwarka are extensive submerged ruins. In other words, the flood myth turns out to be true. And there is no way to date those ruins. There is no datable artifact that has ever been found. There are large stone ruins at the bottom of the sea off Dwarka in Gujarat. And the whole It's a sacred city, rather like Varanasi, and many rituals there are performed in connection with this lost city of Dwarka. Then, if we come in a little further down from Gujarat to the Gulf of Cambay, there was this extraordinary finding in the early 2000s of huge cities at the bottom of the Gulf of Cambay, 40 meters underwater. They'd been submerged for more than 12,000 years. And they were found with side-scan sonar. It's impossible to imagine that that these are natural features. Up to today, they have never been dived on. No submarine has ever been sent down. And the initial dredging work produced many man-made artifacts from those two cities which lie on either side of ancient river courses, but then all the work was stopped, and since about 2002 it's never continued, and I honestly can't tell you why. If we go to South India, we find a huge flood myth of a lost land called Kumari Kanda. And we are told that it was a highly civilized place, and that it was destroyed by the gods in a single terrible day and a night. Guess when? 11,600 years ago. Exactly the same date that is given by Plato for the destruction of Atlantis. And interestingly, if we use the latest science to look at sea levels at that time, we find that southern India was vastly extended into the Indian Ocean. That the Maldives Islands were much larger than they are today. And we do still find pyramids on the Maldives. They're quite small. That's an aerial shot of one of the little pyramids on the Maldives, and that's a pyramid. You can see the wall of the pyramid there in the Maldives itself. In Kanyakumari, at the very southern tip of India, this myth is preserved and elaborated to this day. So there's a huge memory of lost lands to the south of India. And here we find, as it was during the Ice Age, Sri Lanka was joined to South India. This is the feature called Rama's Bridge between Ramaswaram and Sri Lanka. And you can still see huge stone structures in the water there. And we have dived at Kumbhar and at Mahabalipuram. And in both places, we have found major underwater structures. We've dived with Indian archaeologists at these sites, and nobody is disputing that these structures are man-made and that they've been underwater for 12,000 plus years. But again, for reasons that mystify me, this is Mahabalipuram, where I did my first ever swimming lessons when I was about 5 years old, and I lived in South India. It was quite strange to end up going back to Mahabalipuram as an adult and scuba diving there. Went there with the scientific, these are the rock-hewn temples of Mahabalipuram on the shore. These are the fishermen who told us about the underwater city, and we made a big expedition there with the Scientific Exploration Society from London, and lo and behold, exactly as the fishermen had told us, there are indeed cities underwater off the coast of Mahabalipuram, and they go for 5 kilometers out from shore. I don't like conspiracy theories, but it really felt like a conspiracy, because after we dived that site, all work was stopped, and nobody was allowed to go back and dive it anymore. And the story was literally brushed under the sea until the Boxing Day tsunami, which exposed the ruins in the bay in front of Mahabalipuram. And nobody could deny anymore that there were ruins there. And now a little bit of archaeology is going on at the site, but it's going on in what's called the intertidal zone, at a depth down to just about 5 meters. They're not going out into the deep water. It's like a deliberate refusal to consider the implications of this site. I'm putting my diving knife in the gap between blocks there. There are very extensive walls, and there clearly was a city there, which is now submerged. And at Tiruvannamalai, inland from there, is this amazing red hill called Arunachala, with a huge temple complex at the base, and a myth there of how in the time of flood, this is where the sages, this is where the rishis go to preserve the knowledge of the Vedas, that it's a place of refuge from the flood. And there's a tremendous place to explore Tiruvannamala, and a wonderful, wonderful climb up the mountain. And it's full of sages and rishis and holy men to this day. In fact, there's one guy up there who's had his arm above his head for the last, I don't know, 30 years. I don't know how they do that, but he does. Let's jump east from India. There's submerged India. And let's go off and have a look at Indonesia. There are the Indonesian islands today, the Malaysian Peninsula. But this was the huge landmass that was above water during the Ice Age. Truly a continent-sized landmass. And this is a curiosity. This is, you would think, really, that this was in Mexico, by the look of it. It looks like a Mexican step pyramid. It looks pretty much like Chichen Itza, actually. But it's not. It's a temple in Indonesia, in Central Java. And it's called Suku. How do archaeologists explain this? They say it's just a coincidence that these things look similar to one another. I think that we may be looking at a remote common source which has passed down influence in both places, and that influence continues to flower and to express itself. But what I really want to dwell on a bit tonight is the site of Gunung Padang near Bandung in West Java, which is one of the very exciting new archaeological discoveries. And I was privileged, Santa and I went with our friend Robert Schock and his wife Katie. We went there in December at the invitation of Danny Hillman Natwajija, who is the chief geologist working on the site of Gunung Padang. We went to Gunung Padang because something extraordinary has been discovered there. And I was really pleased that Schock was able to come along and bring his geological perspective to bear on the site. Because it's not archaeologists who are doing this work, it's geologists. Danny Hillman is the senior geologist at Indonesia's Geotechnology Center. He got his PhD at Cornell. And he's a remarkable man. And when he started to say that it looks like Gunung Padang ranges between 9,000 and 20,000 years old, not just 2,500 years old, he stirred up a huge shitstorm of archaeological fury. But he's stuck to his guns, and he's doing really good science on that site, some of which I'll show you. This is the overall setting of Gunung Padang, and that's the pyramid-shaped hill on which the structures stand. And it's about 100 meters high, that pyramid. It's an entirely artificial man-made pyramid. There's Schock and myself, and that's Danny Hillman, on our way up to the top of Gunung Padang. And when you get up there, well, Danny unfurls his scanning results, which are very, very, very extensive. He starts making the point that this stuff is what archaeologists have been dating. This is the surface layer, the very top terraces at the top of the pyramid of Gunung Padang, which are made out of a material called columnar basalt. That's a form of basalt that forms naturally into hexagonal blocks. But it also makes a very useful building material. And there's this very extensive site on the top of what was thought to be a natural hill, and it's that extensive site that has been dated really on no good evidence, just a tiny bit of carbon dating, to 2,500 years old. For a long time, that's been the mainstream view, that this site is about 2,500 years old. Did the first extensive survey on the site. And they point out that all the archaeology that has tied that site to 2,500 years ago is just based on a skim of this surface layer. And what they're really interested in is the deep layers of this 100-meter high pyramid, turns out to be entirely man-made, which stands at Gunung Padang. So there is the archaeological trenching. That's as far down as it went. And that was all the information we had until Danny got to work. Even the naked eye will tell you that there's much more. As you go down the sides of that pyramid, you can see that there are stones sticking out of the sides of the hill. And it turns out that, as I say, that the whole upper layers of this are man-made. And Danny and his team used a whole range of remote sensing equipment. They used surface geology, they used archaeology, they used geomagnetic survey, ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity, seismic tomography, drill core sampling. We did lab work, metrology, carbon dating, and so on, and also architectural analysis. And here's an example, here's illustrations of Danny and his team at work. Because about 8 months ago, their work was stopped. They were not allowed to continue to do any more work. And the reason they weren't allowed to continue doing any more work was because a cabal of archaeologists in Indonesia said, we know this site is just 2,500 years old, and there's no need for any further work. It's a sacred site, don't interfere with it, leave it alone, all the work has been done. But all the work hasn't been done. And the extensive survey that Danny and his team conducted before they were stopped came up with some really intriguing results. I just want to show you some of the methods of surveying that they used here. And hopefully you will understand that this was very thorough work that these people did. Very extensive work on Gunung. And included in that work was carbon dating, which they did with drill cores. Those drill cores brought up man-made objects, cut stone, and they brought up organic material from the same layers that that cut stone was found in. And drill core 1 started to find material going back 7,000 years or so. The deeper you get, the more ancient it gets. And then 16,000 years. Then when we get to drill core 2, again that top layer at 2,500 years, then 7,880 calibrated years before Christ, 28,310 years old, 21,000 years old, and a nice series of dates from exactly 11,600 years ago, at the time of the end of the Younger Dryas, as we go through the various layers of this pyramid. So what Danny and his team are feeling is that we're looking at a monument that has been a monument since the last glacial maximum, and that has been continuously evolved and built up over that whole period. And what a lot of their surveys unite on is that there's a chamber in that monument. Very high resistivity on the remote scans. A large, regular chamber in the heart of the monument. And they're suggesting that it is an artificially altered lava tube. Oddly enough, under the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, you have the same thing. You have a tunnel, which is a lava tunnel, which has been altered by mankind into a regular shape, and you have a chamber. That chamber is the raison d'etre for the construction of the Pyramid of the Sun. It looks like exactly the same thing. The thing is much too regular, according to the remote sensing, to be analysed as a purely natural feature. It's definitely been altered by human beings. And I'll just show a few more slides, all of which concur. There's the suggested entrance to the feature, all of which concur on the existence of a large chamber, an extremely high resistivity zone in the heart of Gunung Padang. And naturally, this is the chamber that they want to excavate. They would like to know what is inside that chamber down in the depths. And it's not the only one. There are 2 other chambers that have also been found. And the place is crying out for excavation, particularly when we consider the context. There is Indonesia today, and there's how it looked at the last glacial maximum. This was a huge continent, and that Gunung Padang site was built on the very high land at the southern edge of that continent. And that's why it's not underwater, while the rest of the continent is underwater. It was incredibly well watered with huge river systems, all of which were swept away by the floods at the end of the Ice Age, until we end up today with the Indonesian islands as we know them. And all around Gunung Padang are a series of other unexcavated megalithic sites. So the whole area is looking incredibly promising from the point of view of investigating ancient history. Now, as I mentioned, Danny's work was stopped. The archaeologists intervened and prevented it, but Danny found a typically Indonesian way to get around that problem. He doesn't give up. And he took it to the highest level. He took it to the president of Indonesia. And he persuaded the president of Indonesia that this work at Gunung Padang must continue and that it cannot be allowed to be stopped on the basis of archaeological prejudice. And just 2-3 weeks ago, the president visited Gunung Padang and he saw all of Danny's research and he's agreed that the research will resume, and it's going to resume immediately. So within a year from now, we should have a much clearer picture of what is going on at Gunung Padang. And I think it's one of the most exciting archaeological sites in the world.
Let's see. All right, so that was that. Quite different than what we've been talking about in the last couple of days. Let's see here. If you want to see more of that, in the description box is the channel called Culture of Cannabis, and you can go ahead and watch more of Graham Hancock stuff if you want. I was taking a few notes, probably not as much as I would normally have. I feel like there wasn't much for me to gleam on, like just solidify. It's just, this is very, I don't know how to put it. It's informational. I mean, a lot of it's still speculation. The great thing is, out of bad occurrences like the 2004 tsunami, that tsunami with the tsunami drawback revealed a lot of the ancient ruins, and thus, I mean, although I think they were working on the ruins and they knew that there were things to uncover before the tsunamis, but it's just interesting to get another person's perspective and to see that there are stories of floods, the Great Flood, probably different events throughout civilization. And if we see throughout the world that there are a lot of ruins under the sea. And so the thought that there were only the great civilizations that are shown in our history textbooks, you know, I don't think that's the case. I do think, yes, there are a lot more civilizations out there to uncover, to discover, and to find, and to analyze, and, you know, anything that they may have had. One good thing about the civilizations where they're writing everything on stone or marble or whatever is they're more or less intact. They're still around. One of the things that he mentioned that caught my attention was the fact that there was no was it Indo-Aryan invasion, Asian Aryan Indo invasion, you know. I think that was a lie based on the UK or Great Britain to just kind of control parts of India. So that's interesting. That's something that I could probably look more into as well. You know, more governments lying about history. Just to be opportunist, I guess. I guess it's an empire strategy. Hey, these people were invaded by us. We took them over. We own the land now. Type of thing. What else is there? I mean, some of those. It's interesting because diving into the entire occult stuff, that we see a lot of occult symbolism within these ancient ruins and civilizations, even before Great Pyramids in Egypt. That's interesting. Makes me wonder what the real history is. Guess we'll never know. I mean, it would be nice if everyone put things out on the table, but not everyone does, because there's advantages by not sharing important information. You know that term, need to know basis, and you don't need to know? Yeah, fuck that. Alright. It's kind of late. It's 11 p.m. Central Time. If no one wants to join, I can go ahead and talking about this specific topic. I think if Perseus wants to, he can join. If not, we can do a open topic, anything goes. I don't see Ryan starting one. If he did, we would join. So that's that. Let me see. No, nothing there. Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, Perseus. So Perseus' goal, he's saying that the bulls with the solar disc on them are representations of a quarrying mechanism. Here we go. Hey, Perseus. Now, that's another.
It took so long to join, but it's like 36 degrees and humid in my apartment right now, so I had to put on a shirt and turn the fan off to actually record.
36 degrees Fahrenheit. What does that mean? It's like it's cold.
No, that's hot. That's very hot for where I live.
I got
Yeah.
no idea. All right, let me do the conversion. 36C to F. Come on, people. 96.8 degrees. That's small cakes. Here.
Yeah, and here in the frozen north, we don't get it too often.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true. All right. So now, it's hard to like. Right now, it's still speculation because.
Actually, I'm so sweaty. I think I'm gonna not use video tonight.
Okay, sure, that's fine. Now, this is still in speculation territory, but it's fun to speculate. And there are coincidences, of course. I mean, we see it all, of stories of great floods throughout different parts of the world in that same time frame. Different parts of the world have ruins within certain, within their under the sea. I mean, if of all the technology that we have, we still didn't find to the extent of all those ruins and civilization stuff until a tsunami had to hit, and some local fishermen had to look at, and some people on shore seeing the tsunami drawback to actually see that there's a lot more stuff out there. So I feel like even with the technology that we have, we still have trouble finding things that are within our ocean.
Well, I don't think it's an issue so much of it's hard to find them as much as the effort that could be spent into it is being spent on other less important things. At least, well, I would consider finding out these types of things a big priority, more so than funding certain types of programs I don't agree with.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like how do I put it? The towns themselves with all these ruins want to either keep it for historical purposes, preservation, or to uncover them themselves, or for tourism money. The governments want to secure that area for their own purposes, maybe to do their own research, prevent other people from other countries trying to find things out. So, it's kind of like, hey, this is mine, or this is ours. It's on our land, so don't mess with it.
And what they really don't want to find is that a different ethnic group that currently doesn't control that land controlled it before, because then there are going to be people claiming they want it back every time. Consistently, it happens.
But I mean, how do people know unless it's passed down generation to generation that they were taken over? I mean, now it's a lot different because there's like a written form, right? And it's a little bit easier to keep history within a family, not necessarily government.
No, I'm certain there's lots of people who are participating in it who are just memeing, okay?
Okay.
But since a lot of people in the right have started learning more about the Barbary slave trade and the reason why North Africa was colonized, and that land was primarily inhabited by Europeans through most of classical antiquity, think that they have the right to take it back, and more people are saying, yeah, we should probably take back those areas, like for strategic purposes. And a lot more people on the right are talking like that now, particularly because they have this excuse now of, oh no, most of classical antiquity, that was European land. It's only in the last 700 years we lost it.
Do they want it
similar to the Israelis' ridiculous argument?
But,
oh, of course, but
that they have an ancestral claim on the land.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's kind of the thing with the whole blood and soil thing growing on the right now. That's kind of part and parcel with it.
All right.
On a side note, dude, like, I'm done with Patreon. It pissed me off. So from now on, like, this is how I'm going to handle donations to creators. Like, get a P.O. box or put your address out there or something. Why are people putting a middleman in between the fucking donation process anyways?
True. All right. So I'll find a PO address and you can send your sarin or your anthrax.
Yeah. I'll send, and I'll even give you the option, man, gift or cash.
Okay. I'll set one up. I think the post office is kind of near here.
I'm done with that shit.
Okay.
You're absolutely right, though. The middlemen are the people who are going to ultimately end up cutting you out when it becomes convenient for them anyway.
Yeah. True. I'll do that, and anything I get, I'll do a little showcase. I'll get like who sent it, and I'll have to preserve it just in case I do get that mysterious white powder.
Don't ever eat anything that anyone sends you.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, look at that! White powdered donuts. Mmm.
What's this green powder on the green powder donuts?
Oh, it's a St. Patty's Day donut.
Yeah, that's it. Is that sugar? It's kind of grainy, kind of sharp, like glass.
All right.
Here you go, kids.
Let's see. What else did we?
Oh, do you find it interesting though that two very disparate legends both point to the 11,600 date for when the cataclysm happened?
Mm-hmm. The Younger Dryas.
Yes.
Haven't spent really much time on it because it hasn't gotten to be like an area of interest, mostly because like it really doesn't affect me all that much.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, in terms of it being practical information for you, if you're not really trying to figure out all the symbolism and try to like see, okay, well, what's the actual timeline of events here? Trying to establish it in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you're not interested in that, then obviously you can.
But I'm interested in the occult symbolism because what's interesting is that the ruins have some very occult symbolism, right?
Well, the solar discs, you have to understand, they're more than just symbolism. Okay, there's a channel that you might want to check out called Ancient Architecture. Mm-hmm. They have a search for a video specifically about solar discs, like in the keywords. And basically they'll explain that the modern recreations of this, it was theorized that this was a tool, not just a symbol. So what they did was they made basically really big gold dishes, and sometimes they were made out of blended gold and silver, like electrum.
Mm-hmm.
and then they would basically place them on diazes, and these diazes would
What
be
are
aligned,
diazes?
like it's basically like a platform shaped like a platform
dais?
shaped.
A dais?
Yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But basically, and then it would be, moved along with the position of the sun in order to refract light to cut limestone and certain other specific types of stone.
Just sunlight.
And yes.
Wait. But why would a property of that? I mean, I would think the reflection of a mirror
the thing
or
that points
glass.
towards this being likely, particularly in both Egyptian and Mayan architecture, is that a lot of the boreholes that they can't explain how they could have drilled through show glazing in them. So it looks like heat was being used to shape the stone, and this was one of the ways they theorized they were using heat to shape it.
So if people can send me blocks of gold, I can test this out. I'll polish it. So I think maybe a ton of gold will be enough gold for me to test this out.
Oh, 1 kilogram would definitely be enough.
Okay.
Come on, be realistic.
It's not enough.
It's not enough.
We-
Okay. I mean, has anyone tried to reproduce?
Yes, yeah. It shows video of people recreating it. That and several other techniques. One that involves using tuning forks to put a vibration into a saw so that it can cut the stone more efficiently without breaking down by getting a specific vibration into the saw.
And it's actually worked?
Yes,
on a
they've
big
recreated it.
scale
It's all
or
being
small
videoed
scale?
in the stuff. Multiple groups have independent. This channel, Ancient Architecture, Matt Simonson, he's like really accredited. Like he's considered an expert
Consider
on this
it?
kind of stuff.
You can do something with high tension like strings made out of strong material as well if you're cutting into something like soft rock or wood.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny you mention that because there's actually some of that literally there. It shows tuning forks with high tension cords pulled between them being used in arrays to do some specific thing that isn't known what they were being used for. But the videos go into a lot of detail about the ways that they were using these tuning forks.
All right. So there's an 8-minute long one. I'll go and share it. Is that okay?
Sure.
I didn't know that, but I was already subbed to it. Interesting. I wonder what it was that I watched to sub.
I'll be back. I might miss part of this.
Okay.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. There are many videos on YouTube which discuss the possibility of ancient high technology, which we believe existed due to the precise stonework of ancient architecture seen around the world. The stone monuments often contain some of the hardest naturally occurring rocks in the world, such as diorite and granite, that were shaped so perfectly and had a clean, smooth finish. And today, in the 21st century, with lathes and diamond bit drills, we still cannot replicate some of the ancient stonework. Just look at this perfect hole through a huge piece of Egyptian granite. How did they do it? And how did they produce this perfectly concave finish on another piece of hard, igneous rock? And look at this pre-dynastic Egyptian vase, hollowed out from a single piece of solid diorite, not to mention the perfect internal right angles inside the so-called sarcophagus of the Great Pyramid. In Cairo Museum's Old Kingdom rooms, you can find dozens of vases, bowls, boxes and statues carved from granite, diorite, schist and obsidian, and there is no easy answer as to how such intricate shapes are achieved with such precision. Modern stonecraft experts have no idea how such objects were made with the limited technology available. We are told by archaeological experts that the ancient Egyptians used tools such as pounding balls, copper chisels and stone hammers. The Old Kingdom stone artifacts have clean lines and perfect proportions, and the giant diorite and granite statues have satin-smooth surfaces and delicately carved features as if coming from a mould. Professor Ivan Watkins, a geologist and stonework expert from St. Cloud State University in Minnesota, investigated some of the stonework in microscopic detail. He says that the primary indicator of how a stone was processed or worked is the condition of the surface of the material at microscopic level. During his investigation, he found that Inca and Egyptian stonemasonry had similar workmanship, indicating that the same technology was available across both nations. Hard igneous rocks are extremely difficult to cut, and a mechanical and physical method of cutting them would leave uneven mineral surfaces, as the rock would naturally crack along low angles if it was hammered. Stones like granite contain a mix of minerals with varying degrees of hardness, and when force is applied to the stone surface, for example, hammering, grinding, polishing with abrasives, it would cause the weaker planes to crack naturally and the tougher parts to keep together. The ancient stonework in the aforementioned Egyptian and Inca monuments and stoneware shows smooth and slick surfaces, which means that scientifically they were not cut using the methods stated by archaeologists. Watkins discovered evidence that some stones certainly underwent extreme heat during modification, so much so that quartz melted into a glaze that filled in irregularities to make a smooth, vitreous surface. Watkins and other researchers have seen these slick stones in various Inca stonemasonry at various sites throughout Peru, having what look like a ceramic glaze. They almost have a plastic look about them. But how did they do it? One clue in the bracelet worn by a modern-day priest in Cusco, Peru. In the annual Festival of the Sun, a priest lit wisps of cotton on fire using a bracelet, which is designed with a highly polished concave indentation to focus the sun's rays. He then found a cache of large parabolic golden bowls kept in a Peruvian museum that seemed to be constructed like golden mirrors that would be able to magnify and concentrate sun rays. If they were in fact an alloy of gold and silver, it would have had fantastic reflective properties. But can sunlight actually cut stone? Watkins points to the conquistadors' records mentioning an Inca golden dish that was so large it spanned the length of 2 men. The sacred artifact was apparently cut up and melted by invaders and shipped back to Spain. Could this have been large enough to concentrate the sun's energy into an almost laser-like beam? Watkins certainly believes so, and he states that an object of this size and made of gold-silver alloy would certainly be able to cut even the hardest of rocks. Consulting with geologist David Lindroth, Watkins tested his ideas in a number of experiments, and he found out that rock could be cut with a 100-watt laser, focused at an area 2 millimeters in diameter. He found that repeated passes using the same power can cut any stone down to size. The light cutting through the stone is called thermal disaggregation. Watkins speculates that the big granite bedrock posts at Machu Picchu look like a place to hold huge mirrors for stone cutting purposes. Peru, like Egypt, gets very strong sunlight all year round. The huge dishes allow the Incas to cut rock in a very precise fashion, and we can see that the blocks are so closely matched that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. Another legend, in the book Secrets of the Andes by Brother Philip, mentions sacred golden discs too. It states that one Inca priest of the Temple of the Seven Rays, named Amaru Meru, fled from his temple with a sacred golden disc, known as the Key of the Gods of the Seven Rays, and hid in the mountains of Hayu Masa. The discs were clearly of great importance to the Incas, and it is important to note just how strongly ancient civilizations worship the sun. Maybe some of the sun discs we see in ancient art are not actually esoteric depictions of the sun, but literal discs that focus the sun's rays, so that the ancients could harness its energy on Earth. Maybe this is the lost ancient technology that would explain so much about ancient construction methods. The amplification of sunlight to silently cut and shape stones as hard as granite, to build magnificent structures and objects, and to seemingly drill perfectly spherical holes. Watkins says that his theory evolved after he noticed a glaze on the wall of a cave that contained Inca stonework, and you can only get a glaze by heating the rock to quite extreme temperatures. Watkins has since patented a solar-powered stone cutting and polishing device that he says was influenced by Inca and Egyptian technology. The idea of ancient lenses being used to harness the power of the sun was discussed at length in Robert Temple's book The Crystal Sun, Rediscovering a Lost Technology of the Ancient World, the most secret science of the ancient world. He finds evidence for the technology in Greece, Egypt, and the ruins of Troy, which he believes has been misidentified. In fact, Temple has found more than 450 ancient optical artifacts, most of them being crystal lenses, but in any case, magnifying aids. Heinrich Schliemann, the 19th century discoverer of Troy, excavated 48 rock crystal lenses. Another hoard was found in Crete, and there are many examples in Mesopotamia and Egypt, mainly from the Old Kingdom. I don't believe, as many claim, that the ancient Egyptians harnessed electricity to power tools such as drills, because, as far as we know, there have never been any electrical items found, but researchers have found evidence of ancient lenses, and together with the golden discs of South America, we now know that there was a way to melt stone, cut it, and fit it together using the power of the sun. Thank you for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. Please like this video, please comment below, and please subscribe.
It's strange that that was the topic, because if you look at the picture that I've got up, right, there's a giant boulder field that's on the Florence-Kelvin Highway, which is like between Florence, Arizona and Superior, Arizona, way out in the desert. And it's a giant boulder field, and it has clear signs that ancient people used to live there and stuff. Like there's petroglyphs in the boulder field, and like you can go in and under the boulders, and there was shelter and stuff. But when I was climbing through them, I noticed that thing, that unnatural space in the rock where at the certain time of the day the sun shines directly through it, like it is now, or like it is in the picture, I should say. And I always wondered if like that, if they had done that that intentionally, or if it was just a natural formation.
No, that's definitely plausible. Well, modern mirrors anyway are made with mercury, which I don't think they could harness the same way that we can.
China had mirrors a long, long time ago, but most of the world didn't.
Well, well, I think part of it could also have to do with the electromagnetic properties.
Well, in Las Vegas, I think it's, what is it, the Wynn? All right, the Wynn is like made out of reflective glass. And for a while, it's concave. And for a while, like people would walk under it at this certain point and get seriously burned to the point where they had to change the glass so it didn't do that anymore. I mean, the sun mirrors can focus a lot of heat from the sun.
Yeah, and especially in a place like, say, Egypt or Peru, where there's specifically, they definitely have like year-round intense sunlight and high temperature. I think that could also be more conducive to it than in, say, in a temperate environment.
Sorry. I was lip syncing. I keep forgetting I had to mute myself. Sorry. Thanks, Socks. Okay. I guess it's time to try it out. So now this is way back in ancient times. This is like at least 4,000-5,000 years ago. How did they get the silver gold ally concave mirrors polished so smoothly?
Well, actually, gold and silver are super easy to work.
But how do you
Like
get
they're
it?
some of the most. They're very ductile, so you can actually get them really thin and spread them out really efficiently, and not even with very heavy hammer work.
Okay. But where would they get this idea from? Like,
Well, the implication being that the common root source that Graham Hancock talks about.
okay.
Well, Zox is arguing that in its original state, I think this is what Zox is arguing, that it was less reflective, and as a consequence of time and physics, the material became more reflective. So it gives us or some people the impression that they were creating like modern mirrors or advanced mirrors back then. I think that's your argument, Zox, right?
Like, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out.
No, the glass being a liquid in physics is a common misconception born out of the fact that they intentionally made panes thicker at the bottom in the old days. Because they didn't have tempered glass. They had to design it differently.
Is that basically
It's an urban legend.
Is that basically it, though, Zox? I might have added something on there, but I wanted to and the glaze flowed over time, creating that appearance. That it was as a consequence of time affecting the glaze.
That's interesting.
Well, anyway,
Uh,
you could come on here and give your own theories, Zox. I'm trying to interpret them.
Here, this is something I want to show people. Right, this is interesting. Parabolic solar mirror, solar death ray power 5,000 sunstone does an actual demonstration. There you go.
Oh, one thing real quick, Evan.
After it's only 4 minutes. Just remember it.
Oh, okay. gonna be a glass bottle in the window.
Interesting. Okay. I buy it.
Hell yeah, that thing's super useful. I bet you could create like a version of that you could fold up and carry around if you use modern materials.
And I think that one is probably about 4 feet somewhat circumference. So what they would have had in the Mayan times would have been 3 times as big as that. So say 15,000. Well, actually, it'd be exponential, wouldn't it? Instead of 5,000 suns, it'd be like 25,000. No.
Well, there's a threshold.
Yeah, it'd be like at least 15,000 suns power.
A larger one
potentially
would be more
more
powerful than that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
To be honest, all of this stuff seems so plausible to me. I'm concerned it's limited hangout on the part of the elites.
Yeah, I could see it.
Do the boreholes and whatever show signs of burning? I mean, that's
Yeah, with the ancient architects, we saw that there's glaze, just like when we saw the demonstration by that guy, that kid or whatever. There's when he did it on the mud, clay, the mud, concrete. There's that glaze, like it was been burnt. But that's pretty cool. I guess all the material that they had was silver gold alloy. But yeah, I guess you could use mirrors, and it's just the same. I didn't think about the parabolic mirror. Wow, I kind of may want to make one. I don't want to start fires.
Oh,
though.
definitely a cool project.
Yeah.
If
Eventually.
you could find the right materials, man, you could like have some kind of fold-up disc of that size, throw it in your backpack, and like be able to take it hiking or fishing or fucking whatever. And just start a campfire with it, or start any kind of fire with it.
Well, I mean, magnifying glasses can do that. I mean, even low-powered magnifying lenses. You could probably get higher-powered magnifying glasses, and yeah, you could probably start fires easily with a higher-powered one. But yeah, trying to make that from scratch is another thing. But I mean, Mayans' architecture were pretty incredible for their time, so that's interesting. I can't imagine they'd have to work in big teams, and that could explain a lot of.
Oh yeah, the Incan civilization actually had like communist-style forced labor pool.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and I see Zox. The other thing that is possible, Zox, is they're not only heating the stone, they're treating the stone before they heat it in some manner.
Yes, the theory being the chemical stone softeners.
Yeah.
He also has a video about that topic as well.
Well, that does make me more interested in the technical aspects of it that I'd love to try to reproduce one day. So Zox, send me some silver and some gold, and I will make this parabolic death mirror. Just kidding, Zox.
Silver and gold, silver and
so now, why would they use, like you mentioned, the olive branch and the Taurus statue?
In the Indian flood myth, they also use the olive branch in the carving as one of the symbols of the story. Because in the Christian version of the story, they also use an olive branch.
Yeah, so what's your explanation on that or Graham Hancock's? Because it wasn't explained. I just noticed it, and you noticed the
Oh yeah,
olive
he didn't draw attention to all the symbols. He just was showing the clear similarities through his choice of which monuments he was displaying, but he wasn't spelling it out for people.
Okay.
But did you notice that on the Taurus statues in the submerged ruins,
at the top,
how they had the same type of headdress with the solar disc as the Egyptian style headdress with solar disc?
Yeah. So they were using the same technology then. And I'll show people what we're talking
Sun
about.
worship makes a lot more sense than some of this other nonsense that people have come up with. Not that I agree with sun worship, but at least it makes some kind of sense.
Yeah. So this with the disc, and then that would be the focal point, probably. The representation. Do you see what I'm seeing?
Yeah, I see what you mean. And usually you see these bull statues constructed all over the world, specifically during the age of Taurus, when the when the constellation Taurus is on the equinox, is rising with the sun in it.
So
the tradition of the zodiac could have been one of those things that was passed down to us from prehistory. I mean, no one really knows where it started.
Yeah. Oh, and the fact that the Celts used the same calendar as the Vedics, not in terms of what they name the months and stuff, but in terms of the actual numbers and like the divisions of time, they used the same one. Now, how the 13-month lunar calendar.
Now, is this just something that was passed on, or do you think they had more advanced communication techniques than we
I think that they were in more contact than we're being told. Like I said before, I think that the reason that this information has been suppressed for so long is the fact that they're covering up a past failed global civilization because they're trying to sell us on globalism now.
I see. I wonder how that past global civilization failed.
Well, it could have been to do with the Younger Dryas event happening or some other thing.
Yeah, so if it wasn't the fault, I mean, right now we don't have the technology to save ourselves from a theoretical asteroid crash or super asteroid or Yeah.
Oh, have you seen? Well, a lot of people think that a lot of the large underground cities and cave complexes that have been found around the world are where people survived during that period. One thing that Varg Vikernes talks about, so take it as a grain of salt, he's not an expert on this. He clearly has his own ideological slant on it. But he thinks that what caused people in Europe to diverge genetically from the people that they were related to previously was having to survive in the caves in southern France during the Ice Age, depleted from sunlight. That's something that he consistently says.
That's an interesting theory. How would they survive?
They would have had to have had running water, which the ones in southern France do. There's an extensive amount of chalk and limestone cave underground water networks in southern France.
Well, the Ice Ages didn't cover the whole Earth. Like, there was a period in Earth's history called Snowball Earth, when the entire Earth was just a big ice cube. But that was before human history. Like, the glaciers only went so far down.
There's a conspiracy theory that, or at least Max Egan also points it out, that the history that we're told isn't correct, and that the possibility that the civilization on Earth, or at least the histories that they say were a long time ago, is actually a lot shorter than it is, or something like that.
Oh, you mean the alternative chronology stuff?
Yeah.
That they've added more years in to push back things for political reasons?
Yeah.
I think that's also possible. But what I don't understand about that theory is you can't necessarily account for the Chinese, Indian, or Aztec calendars not syncing with the European ones. That conspiracy has a lot to do with the Catholic Church, which means that, you would have calendar systems in other parts of the world that wouldn't sync, but they do sync. And it would be a little bit
It'd be
too
tough to
convoluted to cover it up.
Yeah, true.
The Aztecs believe that the world has been destroyed, I think, 4, maybe 5 times before. And the last time that it was destroyed, everyone was eaten by all-devouring jaguars. That's the legend.
All devour.
The next time
jaguars.
it's supposed to be by fire.
Yeah, the Potawatomi, they have I explained the prophecies of the first through 7th fires, right? Well, I mentioned they existed, but I don't think I've told you any of them. But they believe that the 7th fire is approaching very quickly.
And one of the times the Aztecs spoke about it was destroyed by water, to go back to the earlier topic. I can't remember which one it was, but I always remember the Jaguars one. That one's crazy. Imagine that.
Maybe there was like some really bad event in their early history where it was like a bunch of people got eaten and it was like the tribe was like eaten.
Jaguars, yeah. Like there was 100 of them or something, and they came across like jaguar after jaguar while they were trying to find a home.
All right.
Yeah. The founding story of Mexico is kind of interesting in that regard, in that the sign that they were supposed to be looking for was an eagle clutching a snake sitting on a cactus, and then they build their town where they found that. And it turned out, well, I mean, obviously that's like the founding myth. That's probably not literally what happened, but it happened to be that lake. Is it Teotihuacan or the other place? I'm not really good at the Mesoamerican.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, good. And that city was an engineering marvel as well, just in terms of the artificial city built in the middle of the lake. Like the artificial island built in the lake being the city, I mean. That's just amazing.
Well, there were civilizations there before the Aztecs, right? They were descended from the Maya and, if you go farther back, the Inca. But
well, no, the Inca were in the Andes in South America.
That culture spread up through, over a period of X hundred or a couple thousand years or whatever. But the Aztecs themselves were like these barbarian types, right? That lived up north, and they came down into the Valley of Mexico, and the civilized people were like, "Who the fuck are these scum?" Like they had pyramids and they had like some technologies and shit, and these scum come wandering in. So they just kind of let them live there, but they made them live out in the fucking middle of the lake on this shitty island, the swamp island. And that's how the Aztecs started. They were like the poor fucking tribe of the region. And they started conquering, and they absorbed the technologies and the methods of the other cultures.
Because if you can enslave a bunch of laborers, you don't have to learn this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I remember kind of looking through, reading some of the history, because I visited Mexico once or twice. Looked at the ruins, and the trade routes were pretty good for back then when the Aztec ruled, and they sacrificed quite often. It's just and they kind of knew when the rains were coming, except when the rains didn't come. That's when they said there was a downfall of the Aztec civilization. They realized, hey, it's not raining, and these sacrifices aren't working. I guess something must have gone wrong in their calendars or whatnot. Something probably got lost, because that's kind of the power, when you tell people that, when you know if you can predict the weather and make it so that you can calm the people down, and that, hey, it's gonna rain, it'll be fine, and then and you just need to sacrifice. So you sacrifice something, and then it rains. People will be like, okay, this guy, he's gonna be our leader, right? Because someone who can make it rain is someone who you would want, because that just means that there's gonna be water for the crops and things like that. I just find it really interesting. I don't know.
They used to have something called flower wars or flowery wars, where they would, like I said, there's different even when the Aztecs rose to power, there were still these different civilizations in the Valley of Mexico, right? So what the different civilizations would do in order to gain the proper amount of sacrifices for the gods is they would have these fake wars. And they would march their soldiers outside of the populated areas, and they would go at it for the sole purpose of capturing people from the other side, dragging them back to the temple, and like cutting them up.
Yeah.
But that's what the example I was trying to use that first time we were talking about how if you let the conflict go on forever, eventually more people will die because the population growth, and you're basically just culling from the growing population instead of just eliminating a smaller group. That's kind of what I meant when I said that kind of non-committal war where you don't just finish it kills more people.
Yeah, but isn't the point for the conquerors to enslave the people so they have a workforce? Because they don't want, you wouldn't want to enslave your own people, because then that revolt would be a lot worse than the one people you just conquered. So it's kind of
true.
It's kind of you got to weigh your options there. If you're conquering force, it's like.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't know enough about how the estates were set up down there to even start thinking about, like, you know, how many acres of land would a person need to have to support how many slaves in, like, the Yucatan area. I have no idea.
I mean, it's really rich.
Like, I wouldn't even be able to begin thinking about the actual factors of trading, like what the actual slave economy would be like there. I had no idea.
The thing is that. Go ahead.
The slave economy in the Valley of Mexico wasn't so much based on race. It was based on class. Like, you could easily be an Aztec and be a slave. Like, they pulled a lot of slaves out from, because by then Maya civilization was in ruins, and there was just a bunch of basically savages in the old Mayan ruins. They would pull slaves out of there, but they would also, like, more frequently enslave their own people. Like, if someone committed crimes, they could become a slave. Or if someone couldn't pay this or that, they would become a slave. Or they could be born into it. But they were still Aztec.
Yeah, I could see that. As just kind of, it's a form of punishment, like not being a part of the citizenry if you don't adhere to the laws of that culture or civilization. I mean, it's done now.
It's definitely more humane than sending them out to the jungle to survive.
Well, I think exiles, they don't like that idea, because the exiles, once there's enough of them, can form a group big enough to have their own army. Especially if they are of that same same bloodline, the civilization, like Aztecs, whatever. I mean, what's interesting when you look throughout history is there's been a lot of conquering, whether it's Julius Caesar or Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, where have you, and how they treat the nation they just conquered, or the people that they just conquered. Because a lot of the times what you see throughout history is they come back and then they're ousted again, and then their descendants go back, and then there's another war, etc., etc. And some of, like, especially like what religion that they're allowed to practice, or whether they don't, whether you have people within that conquered nation appoint some of them to govern. That way they understand that they can govern themselves with, allotments going to the nation that conquered them. So but then they got to be under the control and under the vice of the conquering nation, etc. So it's really interesting how a lot of that plays in. And so go ahead.
The Aztecs also had, like, a lot of geographical limitations. That's the desert.
Garden?
Oh, you just cut out there for a bit. Go ahead. Geographical limitations, you're saying? That's weird. I can't hear anybody. Perseus, you want to say something?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Check.
Okay, I hear you.
Yeah, we just heard you again.
Okay. Anyways, geographical limitations. Up north, it was desert. Can't really move armies through it. There weren't a whole lot of people to conquer. And if you go south, like, it was crazy jungle. So they mostly, like, they were kind of forced to cooperate in a way. Like the Aztecs and the people from Texcoco and all these other people in the Valley of Mexico were pretty cooperative, considering. I mean, they did all this crazy shit like sacrificing thousands of people at once, but there wasn't a whole lot of internal fighting. Like the
Probably because
Aztecs
the
got,
ritualized bloodletting.
yeah, and I mean, they're just, there was only so much territory, and the infrastructure was so important that you wouldn't want to risk destroying it in a war. Like those floating gardens and stuff. I mean, they fed the Valley of Mexico. They were like kind of a
That makes a lot of sense.
common property amongst all these different factions. So they wouldn't really fight over them.
Yeah, and by using mass sacrifices as a way to population control the people, they could keep the population at a specific level where there wouldn't be enough of. They knew that they would basically wreck everything if they went to war with each other indefinitely. So it's kind of like they were being intentionally kept at a point where they had to cooperate, just because otherwise the whole system might break down.
Yeah, and the Aztecs, as time went on, began to abuse their power over the other tribes. And by the time Cortez showed up, there was enough resentment against them that Cortez was able to co-opt some of these other tribes and, launch a force of 30,000 native warriors against Teotihuacan. The other part that factors into that is, and his name isn't pronounced, there's the proper pronunciation, but everyone calls him Montezuma. Montezuma was a fairly new leader. Like the guy before him had died unexpectedly. And Montezuma was your typical kind of like elite young man who thought he could fucking do anything he wanted. And the rest of the tribes hated him for it. And you have some people began to believe that Cortez was Quetzalcoatl, that he was the serpent god, come back to, lead the Aztecs to whatever.
Oh, and the prophecy of the seventh fire actually has a specific connotation that would make them believe that. It specifically refers to white-skinned people in the prophecy of the seventh fire as being integral to it.
Yep, and there were other parallels like the sea, like Quetzalcoatl went out to sea at one point and said he would come back. So these people were coming from the sea.
And the horses probably.
They had these strange animals like the sails. I mean, they hadn't come up with the concept of sails yet. They didn't know what the fuck that was. So feathers, So
yeah,
there's a whole lot of factors that contribute into it. But the Aztecs had things like running water. They had a plumbing and a sanitary system. In many ways, they were at least as advanced as the Europeans that ended up taking them over.
Oh, they used a base 20 math system that was incredible for the use of their calendar. Like, they were definitely very advanced. Definitely.
There was the fourth fire prophecy is what was light skinned. I guess it.
Oh, okay.
I guess it is kind of redone in the seventh. Anyways,
yeah,
that's another thing.
Oh, good. You looked it up.
Yeah, there's another thing that we could probably do an episode on, but I mean, this is just kind of, for me, it's just kind of fun stuff. I don't really glean much out of it. But does this affect you, Perseus? Is it more of like your
this type of stuff is incorporated into my spiritual beliefs. Okay. But again, I take everything with a grain of salt.
So does it because of that, does it affect your decisions that you make? And I know you do have decisions based on
yes,
controlled
absolutely.
substances, but and you can let me see. But does it make your
Oh yeah, all
physical.
this type of stuff that's been on the show today is
Mhm.
stuff that informs the way that I think.
Okay.
It doesn't like literally control the way I go about my daily life because it's abstract. It just forms a basis of my worldview so that
Mhm.
I have a solid foundation so I can feel like the world's solid enough I can make plans within it. Like I can contextualize my actions within that environment.
Okay. How many people do you think are out there that uh, follow that same
Well,
worldview?
I definitely think Donald Trump does based on something that Graham Hancock himself says about Trump. And Graham Hancock is not a Trump supporter. He doesn't like him. But he did say he was the person who reported on the fact that at a party that Trump was at, the main curator at this Maltese archaeological museum or society was in an argument with Trump because Trump was saying that this particular site at Malta, I think it was called the Hypergeum, was definitely made in the Neolithic, based off of the type of artwork in it and the chemical composition of the pigments used in the artwork. And then the Maltese were saying, no, the Romans built it. There's no way what you're talking about is correct. And it turned into such a big fight that they lit the Maltese museum guy literally had the artwork scrubbed off the walls of the Hypergeum to end the argument with Trump. But the fact that Trump's talking about this whole more advanced architecture being built during the Stone Age, that kind of makes me think that he probably knows a lot about that kind of stuff we wouldn't have access to.
That's interesting. That's something about Trump I never knew.
And the other technology that I believe it was the Aztecs that they had was locks. They could create water locks where, you rise a boat up, lower it down using locks, water.
Yes.
And I don't think Europe had that at the time.
Oh, probably not. No.
I didn't know that either.
Also, if you're looking at that site, which one was the Jaguars, dude? Did you see it?
I always thought that Jaguars were for Aztecs, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was. The Aztecs said that.
Oh
at
no,
one point
what is
the
it
world
called?
was-
The religion that I'm referring to, the seven fire prophecies, like the first through seventh, that is a civilization that came about maybe 400 years after the Mayans did in North America, that has a very similar logistical structure to the way they laid out their settlements. It was like a cousin culture. So
Okay.
their religion has certain parallels, but it's not identical. But there's a lot of the same symbolism used and that kind of stuff. Like they represent both religions represent the Milky Way in the night sky as a rainbow serpent, for example. And what's another example of one they both do?
While you're remembering, so Jaguar Warriors or Jaguar Knights
I'll see
were
if
members
I
of the
can-
Aztec military elite. They were
Yeah.
type of Aztec warrior called the but I don't know how to say it. In Mayan mythology, the Jaguar was seen as the ruler of the underworld. I guess that makes sense. And as such, a symbol of the night, sun, and darkness.
On Netflix, I watched this documentary about this uncontacted tribe that they were contacting, and one of the women they were interviewing, who was like one of like the women elders of the tribe, who was like 24, said that her mother and grandmother both were eaten when they were 30 by jaguars.
So, looking at the locks, it says Leonardo da Vinci's canal lock. He was invented of it. But interestingly,
When though?
Leonardo da Vinci. I don't know exactly when he lived. I don't want to get the dates wrong. But are you saying the Aztecs locks? Did that? I don't know. I don't see it.
Well, I do know that the Yucatan Peninsula had very complex water management systems, like with cisterns for fresh rainwater collection, certain freshwater springs, and then certain saltwater caves because it's a limestone peninsula, the Yucatan. So there's a lot of cracks in the ground that water very quickly absorbs down into, and then it forms like underground rivers in, rather than staying near the surface. It has very thin soil.
Yeah.
So there's a very complex series of artificially constructed cisterns, and then also certain caves that are exploited to manage the water there. And crap, I've forgot where I was going because I got lost in trying to remember the details of how it worked. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'm actually getting pretty tired. I've been on the show the last couple nights in a row.
Yeah.
And I've been like staying up way too late doing it for like several days now, and I think I should probably call it a night.
Okay, what time is it there?
It is.
Have a good night.
Yeah, it's about to be 1.
Okay. Ah, weak sauce. I'm just kidding. Thanks for coming on, though, Perseus.
See you, man.
See ya.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem.
See you guys.
See ya. Let's see, what else? What should we talk about now? Open topic, anything goes, and just listen to TYT.
Sounds good to me. Put the link up, dude. We're gonna go to town tonight.
All right, let's visit some TYT and just go off on them.
You want to go off on a TYT clip?
Yeah. All right.
Pick a hated TYT clip, and we'll tear it up.
We'll do recent ones.
All right.
We're gonna do the main show.
Sure. Like Jank did a shitty interview with a Green Party candidate. Trying to think of some other ones. Like I don't watch them a whole lot, but some of them stick out. I don't know, dude. You pick one, and I'm sure I can find something wrong with it.
Okay, so people who are watching, that ends our topic for this episode, or whatever we want to call it. This discussion. So we'll be offline. We'll be online again in a few minutes. And it's gonna be an open topic. Anything goes. You guys, anyone who wants to come in can talk about anything. And so just wait a few minutes. Garden, you won't be able to hear me. And we'll end on this.